everyone, welcome to The Hindu Current Affairs for Beginners by Law Excellence. Before starting our today's session, first let us see the prelims practice questions from our Saturday's video. The first question is, consider the following statements. The National Company Law Tribunal is the adjudicating authority to resolve insolvency disputes for corporates and individuals. This statement is incorrect because National Company Law Tribunal is the adjudicating authority only for corporates, whereas for individuals it is the Debt Recovery Tribunal which is the adjudicating authority to resolve these insolvency disputes. The next statement is, insolvency resolution plan prepared by the insolvency resolution professional has to be approved by 66% of the committee of creditors in order to be implemented. Yes, once the National Company Law Tribunal or Debt Recovery Tribunal, if they take up the petition of the creditor or the debtor, whoever comes to them to resolve this insolvency, now let's start our today's session. These are all the topics that we are going to cover in our today's video from the Hindu newspaper. Our first article is Lok Sabha polls from April 11 to May 19. This article comes under GS paper 2 under the topic of polity, and the subtopic here is elections. The dates for our Lok Sabha polls has come out and it is going to be in a 7-phased manner. It is from April 11 to May 19. Now, from this article, now we have to see about simultaneous assembly elections to be held in 4 states. What is this simultaneous elections? Simultaneous elections means holding the elections to Lok Sabha as well as the state legislative assemblies simultaneously once in a 5-year. But at present, elections to the Lok Sabha and to the state legislative assemblies were not being held simultaneously. Sometimes elections to some legislative assemblies might happen together with the elections of Lok Sabha. And now 4 state legislatures are going to have their elections along with this Lok Sabha. This idea is not new to our country because in 1951 to 52 the first general election to Lok Sabha was held simultaneously with all the state assemblies. But later this practice has got disrupted, and even the Law Commission and the Parliamentary Standing Committee has favored this simultaneous elections in its reports. What is the need for these simultaneous elections? Why the Law Commission has to recommend this? One reason is these frequent elections will affect the governance as imposed, because here for an election to be conducted, the model code of conduct has to be imposed in the poll bound areas, and this will put hold to all the developmental activities. It will hold all the developmental activities in that area, and it will also affect the bureaucracy's functioning. And the next thing is, elections in India is a big budget exercise. The expenditure can be reduced by conducting these simultaneous elections. And the Law Commission in its 170th report, which is titled as Reform of Electoral Laws of 1999, it has suggested holding these simultaneous elections at all the levels in order to bring in the stability in governance. These frequent elections will disrupt normal public life and affect the functioning of essential services. Moreover, these frequent elections will lead to frequent disruption of road traffic by political rallies and also leads to noise pollution. And the major thing is the manpower, the crucial manpower, especially the teachers who will be deployed very often for conducting these election duties for a prolonged period of time. Their manpower will be lost. If these simultaneous elections were held, then this manpower will be available for other important tasks. And the next thing that we need to know about here is VVPAT, Voter Verifiable Paper Audit Trail System. This is a method that will provide feedback to the voters. It will provide feedback to the voters, not to the political parties. It is an independent verification printer machine. It is an independent verification, voter verified printer machine that is attached to the electronic voting machine. This will allow the voter to verify if the voter had voted to the intended candidate, whether they have casted their vote to their intended candidate. How will this machine work means, when a voter he presses a button in the electronic voting machine, a paper slip will be printed through this machine, VVPAT machine, and this slip will contain the poll symbol and name of the candidate. It will contain these two. This could be a possible question. What all will be there on this VVPAT slip? It will contain poll symbol and name of the candidate. This slip will allow the voter to verify his or her choice. And after being visible to the voter from a glass case in this VVPAT for 7 seconds, this ballot slip will cut and drop into this drop box in the VVPAT machine, and a beep sound will be heard. These machines can be accessed only by the polling officers. And the other important aspect to know from this VVPAT machine is, this could be one area of possible question, and will all these slips will be counted while counting the results? Will all the slips will be counted? No. Here what will happen is, a random polling booth from each constituency will be selected and those slips only will be counted, but not all the VVPAT slips will be counted. So the criticism here is, these were brought in because in order to detect if there is any possible election fraud or malfunction, and these machines will serve as a means to audit the stored electronic results. But not all the slips in these machines were being counted, but only from each constituency a randomly selected booth will be taken, and from that particular booth these VVPAT slips will be counted. Now most of the political parties were raising their voice to count at least 50% of these VVPAT slips. The next article is the mysterious disappearance of F03. This F03 is a Royal Bengal tigress that missed out from the Orang Tiger Reserve of Assam. This article comes under GS paper 3 under the topic of environment, and the subtopic here is conservation. So in this article here, though this article is not of much importance, but here there is a mention of a national park known as Assam's Orang National Park. So whenever any national park or wildlife sanctuary or any reserve that appears in the paper, just note it down, and also where is its location. Now let us see what are all the other national parks that were there in Assam. One, we have seen that it is Orang National Park. The other thing is Kaziranga National Park and Manas National Park, Nameri National Park, and the other one is Dibru Saikova National Park. All these 5 national parks belong to Assam. The next article is Heatwave, Sunstroke declared state-specific disasters. This article comes under GS paper 3 under the topic of disaster management. So from this article, sunstroke, heatwave were declared as state-specific disasters by the state Kerala. First of all, what is this heat wave? It is the period of abnormally high temperatures, more than the normal maximum temperature. These heat wave will occur in generally between March and June in the northwestern parts of India. And in some rare cases, it can extend even till July. The extreme temperature and the resultant atmospheric condition will affect the people as they cause physiological stress, and it also sometimes lead to death of the person. This is all is about this heat wave. Then what is this sunstroke? Sunstroke is a progression of milder heart-related illness like heat cramps and heat exhaustion. The symptoms of the sunstroke is body temperature will be 104 Fahrenheit or 40 degrees centigrade, or it will be higher, and there will be a throbbing headache, muscle weakness, and there will be huge vomitings, and the breathing will be in a rapid manner. What and all we can do to prevent this? We can avoid becoming dehydrated by drinking more water, and we should avoid rigorous physical activities in hot and humid weather. The treatment for this is the condition, it needs immediate attention. If it is untreated, the sunstroke can damage the various body systems and organs, even including the brain, heart, kidneys, and also muscles. So now, the state government of Kerala has declared this heat wave, sunstroke as state specific disasters, and under this it has set aside 10% of its state disaster response fund to offer compensation to the people who were affected by this sunstroke and heat wave. And in the event of death, a family of the deceased person will get 4 lakh rupees according to Kerala government. Now, what is the State Disaster Response Fund? Under the Disaster Management Act of 2005, a financial mechanism was set up in the name of National Disaster Response Fund at national level and State Disaster Response Fund at state level, in order to meet the rescue as well as relief expenditure during any notified disaster. And in case of this SDRF, that is a State Disaster Response Fund, here it is constituted in every state where the central government will be contributing 75% for general category states and 90% of the funding will be provided by the center for special category states of hilly regions every year. This fund is available as a resource to the states to meet the expenses of relief operations that were of immediate in nature, and also to meet these specified disasters. Now these are called as state specific disasters like heat wave, sunstroke, and out of this fund total SDRF, 10% is kept aside to meet these specified disasters. The next article is when pharma companies don't pay up penalties. This article comes under GS paper 2 under the topic of governance, and the subtopic here is issues related to health. So the entire article is about the pharmaceutical companies which have overcharged, that means who have charged their drugs with overprices, and those companies were slapped with penalties. But the problem here is the government had failed to recover the penalties that were imposed on these pharmaceutical companies. Who has to recover it? It is the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority. So what is this National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority? This authority was constituted in 1997 as an independent regulator for pricing of drugs, and also it is this authority which should price the drugs And it is this authority which should also make sure that the drugs were available as well as accessible. They are accessible at affordable prices, and this functions under the Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers. What are the functions of this authority? As we said, it is this authority which will price the drugs and it will make sure they are available and accessible at affordable prices. What are all the other responsibilities of this National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority? The thing is, this authority was established based on an order known as Drugs Prices Control Order of 2013. So, this authority was established as per this order in order to implement the provisions of this order. And it should also monitor whether the drugs were available, and it should identify if there is any shortage, and it has to take the remedial steps according to that shortage. And this organization should collect and maintain the data on production, exports and imports. What is the market share of individual companies? Even they should have that data. And what is the profitability? That is, what is the rate of return of the companies for bulk drugs and their formulations. It should review, it should undertake some relevant studies with regard to pricing of drugs and also the pharmaceuticals. It should advise the central government on various changes and revisions in the drug policy. It will render the assistance to the central government in parliamentary matters that were related to drug pricing. So, to put it as a whole, this NPPA will implement the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Policy of 2012. It will provide the ceiling price of all the drugs that were notified under the Schedule 1 of this Drugs Price Control Order of 2013, and it will monitor if there is any price fluctuations. What is the annual price increase for these Schedule 1 listed drugs as well as also for non-scheduled drugs. Recently we have seen that for some of the non-scheduled drugs, the pricing was brought down by 87% for non-scheduled cancer drugs. The next article is Johnson & Johnson told to pay compensation. This article comes under GS paper 2 under the topic of governance, and the subtopic here is issues relating to health. So this article is all about the Johnson & Johnson company was told to pay compensation for manufacturing and importing of faulty articular surface replacement hip implants. Now they were asked to pay compensation to its victims. Who asked them to do so? It is the Central Drugs Standard Control Organization. From the prelims point of view, it is very important for us to know whenever an organization appears in the paper, because now they have been asking about what are its functions and under which ministry it falls. This Central Drugs Standard Control Organization, it functions under the Directorate General of Health Services under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and it is the National Regulatory Authority of India. As we said that it is the National Regulatory Authority of India, what it does is under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, this organization is responsible for approving new drugs and in conducting clinical trials, and it is this organization which has also should lay down some standards for the drugs, and it should control the quality of imported drugs in the country. For that reason, it has to lay down some standards. So the imported drugs, The quality of these imported drugs will be checked based on these standards that were laid down by this Central Drug Standard Control Organization. And it also needs to coordinate the activities of state drug control organizations by providing expert advice in order to bring uniformity in enforcing this Drugs and Cosmetics Act. And this organization, along with these state regulators, it is also responsible not only for approving new drugs and conducting the clinical trials, but also for granting licenses of some specialized categories of critical drugs. Critical drugs like blood products, IV fluids, vaccines and sera. So it is this organization along with the state regulators who will provide license to these critical drugs. And to put it specifically, it is the Drug Controller General of India that functions under this CDSCO, that is the Central Drug Standard Control Organization. It is this Drug Controller General of India which will approve the licenses of these specified categories of drugs, and they will lay down the standards and quality of manufacturing, selling, import and distribution of these drugs in the country. The next article is the flawed unit of academic quotas. This article comes under GS paper 2 under the topic of governance, and the subtopic here is issues related to education. So to summarize what this entire article is saying is, the Banaras Hindu University, like other central universities, is also following the University Grants Commission policy of treating a university as the unit for providing reservation. So now our courts, they have used the differences between cadre, service and post to arrive at a conclusion that department should be the unit. It is the department which should be the unit of reservation but not university. Though we have taken this university as the unit, in nearly 40 central universities, there is a huge underrepresentation of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, especially at the level of professors and associate professor. So, the entire article is talking about if this department is brought in as a unit for providing reservation, then this number will be brought down. A study of 20 central universities by the central government, it has shown that these reserved posts will come down from nearly 2,662 to 1,241 in a year if this department is taken as a unit for reservation. The next article is resolution at last. This article comes under GS paper 3 under the topic of economy, and the subtopic here is banking. In our Saturday's video, I have clearly explained what is this issue all about. ArcelorMittal has won the bid to take over SR Steel, and it has paid 420 billion rupees to resolve these SR Steel's debts, and 80 more billion rupees will be spent on this profitability and also on its operations. And in that video, I have clearly explained about this insolvency and bankruptcy code and how the process of insolvency resolution according to this insolvency and bankruptcy code will take place in India. And there I have provided you a detailed explanation. Please refer to that video. That video starts at 8 minutes 40 seconds and the video is on 9th March of 2019. So for this insolvency resolution process, please refer to 9th March 2019's video which starts at 8 minutes 40 seconds. The next article is there is still room for talks on GSP. This article comes under GS paper 3 under the topic of economy. So this entire article is talking about the generalized system of preferences. Recently, United States has withdrawn these benefits to India. What are these benefits? Under this program, our Indian products can be exported to US markets with duty-free tariffs. That means they can enter into the US markets without any duties or tariffs imposed on them, so that our Indian products can become competitive in the US markets, and the exporters can make profits out of these special benefits. But recently US has withdrawn this provision to India. This article is saying that still we had some more time and space to revoke this already withdrawn GSP provisions. So now, the another term which we are going to see in this article is about CATSA, countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act, which is the federal law of United States that imposed sanctions on Iran, North Korea and Russia. And this law also includes sanctions against the countries that will engage in transactions with Russia's defense and intelligence sectors, and this law is aimed at every country which will have military and energy connections with these countries. The next article is SEBI seeks power to grant immunity. This article comes under GS paper 3 under the topic of economy. So this article, in order to strengthen its information gathering capacity and in order to speed up its investigation, the market regulator Securities Exchange Board of India, it is asking for direct powers to grant immunity in some selected cases, in order to impose lesser penalty if the accused agrees to provide assistance against the other wrongdoers. As SEBI is asking now to provide the powers to it to grant immunity, then who is giving this immunity? In case of any securities law violations, this immunity can be granted only by the central government till now. Now SEBI is asking these powers for it. Is there any other organization which has these powers? Yes, these powers were available with the Competition Commission of India, which is a statutory body that is established to eliminate the practices that will adversely affect competition in different industries or areas, and it will protect the interests of consumers and ensures freedom of trade. This organization, this authority has this powers to grant immunity accused who have violated the laws, but if he provides assistance to the regulator in proceedings against some other accused, then these people will get lesser penalties. And these kind of provisions even SEBI is asking. Even though an accused has committed or if he has violated security laws, but if he is still providing assistance to SEBI in proceedings against other accused before completing the investigation, inquiry, inspection or audit that is ordered by it. The next article is India asks Saudi Arabia to invest in strategic oil storage. This article comes under GS paper 3 under the topic of economy, and the subtopic here is mobilization of resources. So from this article, now we are going to see about a concept known as Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserve Program. First of all, what are these strategic petroleum reserves? What is this strategic petroleum reserves? These are the reserves which were held in stocks. These are the crude oil reserves that were held in stocks by a country in order to meet any crisis situations. If there is any crunch situation, then this stock of crude oil can be used, because the government should be prepared with emergency stores of this crude oil in order to overcome the supply shocks of this fuel. Many major global oil consumers like US, China and Japan, they have built massive strategic reserves of oil, and India is also on this path since a decade. And what is our India's plan on strategic petroleum reserves? What is our India's stand on it? Even Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserve Program, under this program, the Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserve Limited, it has constructed 3 strategic petroleum reserves in huge underground rocks at 3 places. One is Vishakhapatnam on the east coast, and Mangaluru and Padur on the west coast. These 3 can facilitate with a total capacity of 5.33 million tons, which can meet for about 10 days of India's crude oil requirements. Now, let's see what this article is saying all about. India is seeking for the investment from Saudi Arabia in order to build emergency crude reserves that will act as a buffer stock if there is any volatility in the oil prices, and if there is any supply distortions for the 3rd largest oil consumer. I said a 3rd largest oil consumer because India is the world's 3rd largest oil consumer after US and China. So that's why now India is asking Saudi Arabia to come and invest in India in this crude reserves if there is any volatility in oil prices and if there is any supply distortions for this oil, so that it will act as a buffer. Why India wants Saudi Arabia to invest? Because the trouble here is India produces very little oil and it depends on the imports for more than 80% of its oil needs. And out of this 80%, the major chunk is from West Asia. And this is the region which is always in some geopolitical phase off. And there is always a risk of this supply distortion from natural disasters, war or any other calamities. So, in order to protect itself from this continuous political risk in this Middle East and Africa, from where the major portion of oil is purchased. So, India is, as I have told before, India has built some underground reserves in 3 locations, and in these 3 locations the reserves can meet up to 10 days of our country's oil needs. But now India is planning 2 more oil reserves with a combined capacity of 6.5 million tons, and this will be sufficient to cover additional 12 days along with this 10 days. So as Saudi Arabia is the key oil supplier to India and it has already exported 36.8 million tons of crude to Indian refineries last year, which is nearly 16.7% out of the total purchase. So now India is inviting this Saudi Arabia in building these emergency crude reserves. So from the prelims point of view, what is important for us here is who is implementing this Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserve Program. It is the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Then who is managing this? It is the Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserves Limited. This is a special purpose vehicle which is the subsidiary of Oil Industry Development Board that functions under the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. So it is this special purpose vehicle which is looking over the construction of these strategic crude oil storage facilities. And as I said, already 3 were built and 2 more needs to be set up, and these 2 will be in Chandikol of Jaipur district in Orissa and in Bikaner of Rajasthan. In these two locations, the two more this oil reserves, the crude oil reserves will be set up. The next article is GST. Jewelry is said to turn cheaper. This article comes under GS paper 3 under the topic of economy. This article says that as per the Income Tax Act, the tax collected at source is levied at 1% on purchase of motor vehicles which are of worth more than 10 lakh rupees, jewelry which is of worth more than 5 lakh rupee, and bullion over 2 lakh rupees. So from now onwards, the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs has said that from now onwards, this tax collection at source for these products will be excluded from the value of goods while computing the liabilities under this GST regime. First of all, what is meant by this tax collected at source? Tax collected at source is the tax that is payable by a seller, whoever is selling, which he collects from the buyer at the time of sale. As per section 206 clause C of Income Tax Act, this governs that the goods on which the seller has to collect tax from the purchases. This section talks about this tax collection at source. Now let us try to understand this with an example. See, now Mr. A wants to sell a motor car of worth 12 lakh rupees to Mr. B. So now Mr. A has to collect this tax collection at source at 1% rate for selling his product, and he has to deposit that 1% tax that is collected with the government. So now as he is selling it at 12 lakh rupees, he has to collect 1% tax on it. That is, then B will be paying 12.12 lakhs, out of which this 12,000 will be deposited with the government. So to put it simply, it is a mechanism where the receiver will extract a certain amount as tax of the payer and will deposit the same with the government. The next article is a swift response could have saved banks. This article comes under GS paper 3 under the topic of economy, and here the subtopic is banking, and it also comes under GS paper 3 under the topic of technology. So now from this article, let us see what is this core banking solutions. It is a solution which will enable the bank to offer lots of, in multiple dimensions, lots of customer centric services on a 24/7 basis from a single location. This is what is a core banking solution is. And using this core banking solutions, customers, they can access their accounts from any branch, from anywhere, irrespective of where they have opened their accounts. We often keep hearing about a term known as e-cuber. What is this e-cuber? This is the core banking solution of Reserve Bank of India, and this will provide a provision of single current account for each bank across the country. Now let's see about what is this SWIFT mechanism. It is the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. This is a secured financial message carrier. This is a secured financial message carrier, and the SWIFT is a cooperative. This is an organization. This is a global member owned cooperative that is headquartered in Brussels of Belgium. This was founded in 1973 by a group of 239 banks from 15 countries, and they formed a cooperative in order to develop a secured electronic messaging service and also common standards to facilitate. Here the most important thing is what for they need all these secured services in order to facilitate cross-border payments. This will allow a safe cross-border payments. This SWIFT mechanism, what it will do is it will transport messages from one bank to the intended bank recipient. Now, Bank A wants to send money to Bank B, whichever is in foreign countries. And this A will send messages to Bank B, and this mechanism will ensure that the message that is sent by Bank A will go to Bank B only but not to anybody else. And Bank B will in return know that Bank A but nobody else will read or send or alter the message when it is on the way. So here banks should have some checks before actually sending some messages. So this is a safe mechanism which will allow these cross-border payments. And the most important thing that you should remember regarding this SWIFT is, see here this SWIFT mechanism is not facilitating any fund transfer, but it is only sending the payment orders which has to be settled by the correspondent accounts that the institutions have with each other. So this is a financial message carrier, a secured financial message carrier which will transport messages from one bank to its intended bank recipient. So by recognizing some of the threats that were there to the banking system and also to the financial institutions, the G7 heads of state or government and the President of European Commission, they have established a task force from the G7 member states and the European Commission and the 8 other countries. And this task force was given with a responsibility to examine any money laundering techniques. It was given a task to examine the money laundering techniques and trends and to review the action which has already been taken at national and international levels, and the task force was asked even to set up some standards in order to address this money laundering problem. What is this money laundering? It is conversion of black money into a legal money. That task force is known as Financial Action Task Force, which is an intergovernmental body that was set up with a purpose to bring in and to develop the policies both at national and international levels to address this, to combat this money laundering as well as terrorist financing. Now let's see today's prelims practice questions. The first question is with regard to this NPPA, National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority, and the difference between this and the Central Drug Standard Control Organization. And the next question is with regard to SEBI, consider the following statements. Try to answer these questions and post your answers in the comment box. In our tomorrow's video, we'll see a detailed explanation for these questions. Thank you.